He used to make grown men weep just by walking into a room. Now he can't walk at all. Kang Min-jae, the most feared name in Seoul's criminal underworld, survived a car bomb that was meant to erase him from the earth. But survival came at a cost. The explosion stole his legs, cracked his empire, and turned the wolves he once commanded into men circling his wheelchair like it was already a throne up for grabs. Then a broke, late, completely unimpressed black woman from Atlanta walked through his front door, and nothing was ever the same again. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this channel to the end, because the twists coming in the next parts will leave you speechless. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The morning of the explosion, Min-jae had eaten breakfast alone. That detail stayed with him afterward. Not the smell of burning metal, not the way the ground jumped up and hit him, not the sound of his own voice making a noise he didn't recognize as human. What stayed with him was the memory of sitting at the long dining table in his penthouse on the 43rd floor of a building he owned, eating rice and grilled fish in complete silence while the city of Seoul blinked awake below him. He had not been afraid of anything that morning. That was the part that hollowed him out later. The car bomb detonated at 7:42 a.m. outside a private parking structure in Mapo-gu. His driver died on impact. His bodyguard lost 3 fingers on his right hand. Kang Min-jae was thrown clear of the vehicle, a fact his doctors called miraculous, which he found grotesque, and landed on a concrete embankment 20 feet from the burning wreckage. The shrapnel did what shrapnel does. 2 vertebrae in his lower spine took the worst of it. By the time the surgeons finished, the verdict was what it was: permanent, incomplete paralysis, T10 and below. He would not walk again. He remembered the neurosurgeon delivering this news. A careful man, precise language. The doctor kept his eyes on the chart in his hands rather than on Min-jae's face, which told Min-jae everything he needed to know about how the man expected him to react. Min-jae had said nothing. He lay in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling and felt the absence of sensation below his hips like a word in a sentence that had been cut out, leaving the grammar broken and irreparable. He did not cry. He did not rage. He simply went very still, the way he had learned to go still when he was 11 years old, and the world was trying to teach him that it had no interest in his survival. He was discharged 6 weeks later into a mansion in Seongbuk-gu that his people had retrofitted with ramps and wide doorways and a hospital-grade bed in what used to be his study. The modifications had been done efficiently, without being asked. His men were good at reading what was required. What they were not good at was looking him in the eye. That was how it started, not with defiance, not with grief, but with the careful, systematic avoidance of his gaze by every person who had once held his eye contact like it was a privilege. 6 months passed. In those 6 months, Min-jae fired 4 nurses, 2 physical therapists, 1 occupational therapist, and a home health aide who made the mistake of calling him sir in a tone that sounded like pity wrapped in a question mark. He stopped attending the remote meetings his Lieutenant Park Seong-ho arranged on his behalf. He stopped eating meals in the dining room. He stopped doing the stretching exercises the therapist had prescribed, and he stopped taking 2 of the 4 medications arranged in a line on his bathroom shelf every morning. And when the pain came, when the nerve damage sent electric fence signals up his lower back in the middle of the night, he endured it alone in the dark, with his jaw locked and his fists pressed against the mattress, because he refused to press the emergency call button his men had installed beside the bed. The call button meant someone would come. Someone coming meant someone seeing. And Min-jae had spent 31 years constructing a version of himself that could not be seen in the dark, in pain, waiting for it to stop. He was 44 years old. He had built the Baekryong Syndicate from a territorial street organization operating out of 3 neighborhoods in eastern Seoul into one of the most sophisticated criminal networks in the country, with operations across logistics, construction contracts, financial services, and enough political relationships to make prosecutors careful about what cases they chose to pursue. He had done this through a combination of intelligence, brutality when necessary, and an almost pathological attention to where power actually lived versus where it appeared to live. He understood leverage the way most people understood language, instinctively, before the thought was fully formed. And now he sat in a wheelchair in a darkened study, surrounded by men who were afraid of him, but no longer afraid enough. And he watched his empire begin to breathe differently, the way a body breathes differently when something is wrong with it. The morning Amara Bennett arrived was overcast, the kind of gray soul morning where the light never quite commits, where the Han River looked like brushed steel, and the apartment towers across the ridge sat heavy in the low clouds. Min Jae was at the window when his household manager, a compact, efficient man named Yoon Dong-hyun, who had worked for him for 9 years, knocked twice and entered without waiting for a response. This was the agreed protocol. Min Jae had banned waiting. "The new caregiver is here," Dong-hyun said. "She's late." "How late?" 22 minutes. Min Jae said nothing. He continued looking out the window. "She had car trouble on the Bukaksan access road," Dong-hyun added. "The vehicle it's not a reliable vehicle." "Send her in." There was a pause behind him. "You want to conduct the interview yourself?" "Did I not just say send her in?" Dong-hyun left. Min Jae turned his chair away from the window and positioned himself behind the large desk that had been lowered 8 centimeters so he could work at it comfortably, a modification he had not thanked anyone for making. He placed his hands flat on the desk surface and looked at the door and waited. She came in carrying a bag that was too large and too full, the strap cutting across her shoulder at a diagonal because one of the buckles was broken. She was in her early 30s, dark-skinned, with natural hair pinned back and a face that was not trying to be anything in particular. Not composed, not apologetic, not careful. She had a small grease smear on the left cuff of her jacket, which she had either not noticed or had decided wasn't worth addressing. She looked around the room once, taking it in without performing the act of being impressed, and then she looked at Min Jae. "I'm Amara Bennett," she said. "I know I'm late. My car threw a belt 2 blocks from the gate. I got here as fast as I could." "I know your name," Min Jae said. "Sit down." She sat. She moved the bag from her shoulder to the floor beside the chair and straightened up and looked at him directly, which people generally did not do on first meeting him even when he had been standing. He studied her in silence for a moment. This was a technique, sustained silence as a measurement tool. Most people began filling it within 10 seconds. Job candidates almost always. He had once watched a police inspector fold in under 15 seconds during an informal conversation at a charity event. Amara Bennett sat for 11 seconds and then said, "You're going to tell me that being late is a deal breaker, or you're going to ask me why I want the position. Which one?" Min Jae said, "Which one do you think?" "The second one," she said. "Because if being late was the deal breaker, you'd have had the man at the door send me home. You let me in, so you want to know why I'm here." He said nothing. "I need the work," she said. "I'm not going to dress it up. I've got experience. 7 years in home care, 2 in acute rehab support. I've worked with post-surgical patients, traumatic injury patients, patients who didn't want to be helped, and made it very clear. I have references you can check. But the honest answer to why I'm here is that I need the income and I'm good at the job." "You drove from Atlanta," Min Jae said. "I moved to Seoul 8 months ago. My references will explain that." "They explain it," he said. "They don't explain why someone with your background files an application for a position caring for an individual whose last 4 caregivers were terminated within a combined period of 11 weeks. She looked at him. "Did you terminate them, or did they leave?" "I terminated them." "Then the question is what they did wrong," she said. "Not what was wrong with the position." Min Jae was quiet for a moment. Outside, the gray morning pressed against the windows. Somewhere below in the mansion's lower level, he could hear the distant domestic sounds of the household. A door, the particular silence of a kitchen operating at minimum. "The agency described the role as complex," Amara said. "I've worked complex before. I'm not here because I think it'll be easy. I'm here because I think I can do it." "The man you'll be working with," Min Jae said, does not want a caregiver. Then what does he want? Min-jae said nothing for a moment. To be left alone. That's not a medical option, she said. Not with incomplete T10 paralysis and evidence of discontinued medication management and what looks like secondary circulatory compromise in the lower extremities, which I can see from here because you haven't moved your leg position since I walked in, and that chair's footrest is digging into the lateral arch of your right foot. Silence. You looked at my intake report, he said. I looked at what the agency sent. I filled in the rest. He looked at his right foot. She was correct about the footrest. He hadn't noticed. He noticed it now. A dull, continuous pressure he had been absorbing without registering, the way he absorbed a great many things these days by simply reclassifying them as background. You're hired on a trial basis, he said. 2 weeks. If you're still here after 2 weeks, we discuss terms. She nodded. She didn't thank him. She reached down, picked up the bag, and stood. I'll need the medication list and the current therapy schedule, if there is one, and I'll need access to the kitchen. Dong-hyun will show you. Okay. She moved toward the door and then stopped. She turned back. One thing. He waited. I'm going to treat you like a person, she said. Not a patient, not a boss. A person. That's how I work. If that's going to be a problem, tell me now so we don't waste each other's time. The directness of it landed somewhere in his chest, with a weight he didn't want to examine. He had not been spoken to that way in 6 months, possibly longer. Get out, he said. She left. She didn't slam the door. She pulled it shut behind her with a soft, certain click that somehow landed louder than a slam would have. Min-jae sat in the chair for a long moment. He looked at the closed door. Then he reached down and adjusted the footrest on his wheelchair, repositioning his right foot so the pressure redistributed correctly, and the relief was small but immediate. He had not done that himself in weeks. He had simply absorbed the pain and filed it somewhere inaccessible. That fact disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. The first day, she asked him for the medication schedule, and he gave her access to the cabinet without comment, and she stood in the bathroom with the bottles laid out on the counter and said, You've been skipping the baclofen and the blood pressure medication. I'm aware. The baclofen is for spasticity management. If you skip it consistently, you're going to have spasm episodes that will be significantly more painful than whatever reason you're skipping it for. I know what baclofen is for. Then take it, she said. He took it. Not because she told him, because the logic was correct, and he was a man who responded to correct logic, and he was tired of the alternative. He told himself this several times, and believed approximately 60% of it. She found the physical therapy equipment stored in the back room, the resistance bands, the transfer board, the hand cycle, untouched in their original packaging in some cases, dusty in others. She didn't comment on this. She simply moved it into the study and began organizing it. I didn't give you permission to move things, he said. The equipment needs to be where you'll actually use it, she said. If it's in a back room, you won't go to a back room. You'll just not use it. You don't know what I'll do. She looked at him. You haven't touched it in 6 months. I know what you've done. He told her to get out of the study. She left and came back 40 minutes later with a tray of food and the medication he was supposed to take with it, and she set it on the desk without speaking and left again without being dismissed. He ate the food. He took the medication. The second day she arrived and found him at the window again in the early morning, and she said, Did you sleep? None of your business. It's medically relevant. 3 hours, he said. Maybe 4. Nerve pain. He didn't answer. That's what I thought, she said. There are repositioning techniques that can reduce the pressure on the affected dermatomes. We can try them tonight if it happens again. It won't happen again. She said nothing. They both knew it would happen again. The third day, during the assisted range of motion exercises she had incorporated into the morning without asking, she said, Tell me something about this place. Why? Because you need to talk to someone, and I'm the one who's here. I don't need to talk to anyone. Okay, she said. She continued the exercise, passive hip flexion, careful and methodical, the way she did everything. Then I'll talk. I had a patient in Atlanta, 60 years old, stroke survivor, right side weakness. refused every piece of help for 8 months, told everyone he was fine, told everyone the weakness wasn't real. And he wasn't fine, she said. The weakness was real. He knew it. He just couldn't figure out how to let the knowing be visible. Min-jae said nothing for a moment. Below the ridge, Seoul spread out in its layered density, apartment blocks and office towers, and the distant green lines of Bukhansan behind everything. This used to be someone else's house, he said finally. She waited. I bought it 12 years ago from a construction executive who made some decisions that made him want to leave the country quickly. He paused. I changed everything inside, the walls, the floors, the garden. But sometimes I can still feel the shape of what it used to be, the way certain rooms don't fit right. Amar said nothing. She finished the left hip and moved to the right. I'm not good at being still, he said. I never have been. I know, she said. He looked at her. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, she said. I know you ran something significant. I know what happened to you and when. I know that you haven't left this property in 6 months, and that the people who work for you are managing the situation rather than supporting it. And I know that whatever you built, it's starting to move without you. She moved to the ankle rotation, steady and controlled. You don't have to confirm any of that. I'm not asking you to. The silence afterward was different from the silences before it. It had a different density, like a room with more furniture in it. That evening, Park Seong-ho arrived. Min-jae had known him for 19 years. He had known him when Seong-ho was 23 and running protection for a commercial district in Dongdaemun, a compact, controlled man with good instincts and enough ambition to be useful and enough discipline to keep the ambition invisible. Min-jae had cultivated him, promoted him, trusted him with the operational details that required someone who could be in a room and make decisions while Min-jae could not. Seong-ho sat across from Min-jae in the study and placed a tablet on the desk with a set of documents related to the Incheon logistics contracts, and he walked through them efficiently, and Min-jae listened and made 3 specific corrections to the proposed approach, and Seong-ho noted them without visible reaction. Then Seong-ho said, There's a meeting Thursday, the senior section heads. They want a physical attendance. Arrange a secure video connection, Min-jae said. They've been patient, Seong-ho said carefully, but several of them are expressing concern that what? A pause. That remote leadership has limitations in this environment. Min-jae looked at him. He kept his face arranged in the same configuration it always maintained in business discussions. Neutral, receptive, giving nothing. Which section heads? Multiple, Seong-ho said. I don't think attributing the sentiment to specific individuals is productive. I'll attend the meeting in person, Min-jae said. Seong-ho blinked. The venue it would require significant security arrangements. Then make them, Min-jae said. You're good at arrangements. After Seong-ho left, Min-jae sat in the study for a long time. The house was quiet. Amara had finished her shift 2 hours earlier, but she had left a note on the desk, handwritten, brief, with the morning medication schedule and a note about the repositioning technique for nighttime nerve pain. He read it twice. He didn't know why. What he knew was this. Seong-ho had not met his eyes when he talked about the senior section heads, not once. A man who had sat across from him for 19 years and never lost eye contact in a difficult conversation had spent 40 minutes tonight addressing a point approximately 6 inches to the left of Min-jae's face. Min-jae understood leverage. He understood power and where it actually lived versus where it appeared to live. And something in the way Park Seong-ho didn't look at him told him that the man who had been managing the Baekryong syndicate in his absence was no longer just managing it. The Thursday meeting was 2 days away. And for the first time since the explosion, Kang Min-jae realized that surviving the bomb might not have been the most dangerous thing that happened to him this year. The Thursday meeting was held in a private dining room on the 4th floor of a restaurant in Yongsan that the Baekryong syndicate had controlled through a shell hospitality company for 11 years. Min-jae arrived 20 minutes early. This was deliberate. He had always arrived early to meetings, not as a courtesy, but because the person who was already present when others entered controlled the geometry of the room. He understood this at a level beneath language. the way he understood most things about power, not as theory, but as physics, as something that operated regardless of whether you acknowledged it. Dong-hyun had driven. 2 additional vehicles followed with men Min-jae trusted specifically because he had tested them in situations where betrayal would have been profitable, and they had not betrayed him. He kept the number deliberately small, arriving with a large security detail to a meeting inside his own organization's controlled space would communicate anxiety. He would not communicate anxiety. The wheelchair required the service elevator. This was the part that ground against something in his chest. Not the chair itself, not anymore, but the route it forced. The service entrance. The elevator that smelled of cleaning product and kitchen exhaust. The narrow corridor that bypassed the main staircase where he would have walked in with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the particular deliberate slowness that had always made men straighten their posture when they heard him coming. He arrived through the back, and he sat in the private room, and he waited, and his face gave nothing. They came in 1s and 2s over the next 15 minutes. 6 section heads, men who ran the syndicate's regional operations across Seoul, Incheon, and the surrounding satellite cities. Men he had known for years. Men who had sat in rooms with him when the rooms were dangerous and the outcomes were uncertain, and had learned to read his expression for direction the way sailors read weather. They greeted him. The greetings were correct, measured, professional. And Min-jae noted, with the part of his mind that never stopped cataloging, that 3 of the 6 made eye contact that lasted approximately 1 second longer than necessary. The kind of eye contact that is performing normalcy rather than expressing it. Jong-ho arrived last. He took the chair to Min-jae's left, which placed him in a position Min-jae could not turn too quickly without rotating the wheelchair, and Min-jae did not know if this was intentional. He noted it and reserved judgment. The meeting opened with logistics, the Incheon port contracts, a territorial dispute in Suwon that required resolution, a police contact who had become unreliable and needed to be managed. Min-jae spoke precisely and briefly on each item, and the section heads responded, and the meeting had the surface texture of a normal operational discussion. Then Seong-ho set his pen down on the table. It was a small gesture, a deliberate pause in the note-taking that everybody in the room registered without looking up. "There's one more item," Seong-ho said. Min-jae looked at him. "The Daejeon expansion," Seong-ho said. "We've had an offer from the Hwang network. They want a partnership arrangement to extend our distribution chain into Chungnam province. It's a significant opportunity. The timeline requires a decision within 10 days. "I've reviewed the Hwang network before," Min-jae said. "My position hasn't changed. They're structurally weak at the management level. Any partnership arrangement absorbs their instability." Seong-ho said, "The financial projection on the Daejeon corridor is substantial." "I know what the projection is." Several of the section heads believe the opportunity outweighs the structural concern. Min-jae looked around the table. The 6 men across from him were doing the thing, the careful thing, the thing that required practice, where you sat in a room and kept your face at a neutral angle while the room rearranged itself around you. "Which section heads?" Min-jae said. No one spoke. He let the silence run. He was patient with silence. He had always been patient with silence. It was one of the few things that the wheelchair had not altered. Finally, Kwon Dae-soo, the head of the Northern District operation, a man who had been with the syndicate for 14 years, said, "The concern is less about Daejeon specifically." "Then what is the concern?" Min-jae said. Kwon looked at Seong-ho. A flicker. A half-second redirection that was, in the context of this room, a complete sentence. Seong-ho said, "The concern is about the pace of decision-making, the delays in the last quarter, the meetings that have been conducted remotely when in-person presence would have been more effective." "I made the decisions," Min-jae said. "The outcomes were correct." "The outcomes were acceptable," Seong-ho said. "The process created doubt. And in our environment, doubt is expensive." The air in the room was doing something. Min-jae could feel it. Not physically. His body could not feel things below T10, but there was a register above the physical where he had always been acutely sensitive. The way pressure changes before a storm. The way a crowd shifts its weight before it moves. "What you're describing," Min-jae said, is not a business concern. Xiang-ho met his eyes. No, he said, it's not. Say it plainly, Min-jae said. If you're going to say it plainly. A pause. The room held its breath. The organization needs a leader who can be present in every sense, Xiang-ho said. Not just strategically, physically, visibly. Our rivals are watching. Our partners are watching. Every meeting conducted through a screen, every event attended in a... Stopped. The perception is becoming a liability. The perception, Min-jae said. Yes. Of what? Another pause. Of a man who may not be able to lead in the way this organization requires. Min-jae said nothing. He sat with his hands flat on the table, exactly as he had sat at the beginning of the meeting, and he looked at Park Seong-ho, the man he had spent 19 years building, 19 years trusting with the operational details, 19 years watching develop into exactly the kind of lieutenant he had required. And he calculated. He calculated the number of men in the room who had shifted their alignment. He calculated what Seong-ho had done with the 6 months of operational control. He calculated the Daejeon discussion as a test rather than a genuine proposal, a measurement of how much resistance remained in the room when Seong-ho pushed. He calculated all of this in approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, "The meeting is over." Seong-ho blinked. "We haven't—" "The meeting is over," Min-jae said. "Everyone leave." They left. All 6 section heads moved toward the door with the practiced efficiency of men who had been trained to exit rooms when Min-jae's tone reached a particular register. Seong-ho left last, and as he passed Min-jae's position, he paused, just for a moment, just long enough to be noticed, and then he walked out without looking back. Dong-hyun appeared in the doorway. Min-jae said, "Give me a minute." Dong-hyun nodded and pulled the door partially closed. Min-jae sat in the empty room. The remains of the meeting were still on the table: pens, notepads, water glasses. The particular archaeological remnant of a conversation that had said one thing on its surface and something entirely different underneath. He pressed his palms flat on the table and breathed. Just breathed. The nerve damage was doing something in his lower back, a low-grade electrical signal that had been cycling all morning and that he had been managing by not acknowledging, but now in the empty room he let himself feel it for a moment. The persistence of it, the way it occupied the space where other sensations used to live. Then he pressed it back down and straightened and told Dong-hyun to bring the car around. He said nothing during the drive back to Seongbuk-gu. Dong-hyun, who had served him long enough to understand the geography of his silences, said nothing either. The city moved past the tinted windows, Yongsan to the Han River Bridge, the bridge to the North Bank, the North Bank winding up toward the ridge, and the mansion behind its walls. And Min-jae watched it with the particular attention of a man who is not seeing the city but is using the movement of it to think. Amara was in the study when he returned, reorganizing the medication cabinet she had built into the shelving unit on the east wall. She heard him come in and turned and looked at his face, and did not say anything immediately, which was one of the things he had stopped finding irritating about her presence, and had started, without entirely admitting it, finding useful. "How was it?" she said after a moment. "How was what?" "Whatever you went to." "A meeting," he said. "Okay." She turned back to the cabinet. "Your afternoon medications are on the desk. The baclofen and the blood pressure. Take them before 5 or they'll affect your sleep." He moved to the desk and sat and did not take the medications. He looked at the window. The gray morning had not improved into afternoon. The clouds were lower now, and the ridge beyond the garden was beginning to dissolve into mist. "Someone is moving against me," he said. Amara stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She set down the bottle she was holding with care, closed the cabinet, and then turned. "How serious?" "Serious." "Inside or outside?" He looked at her. "Why does that matter to you?" "Because inside is more dangerous," she said. "Outside you can see coming." He was quiet for a moment. "Inside." She came and sat across from him, in the chair she had established as the chair she sat in when they talked, which had happened gradually, without discussion, the way most things between them had happened. She sat with her elbows on her knees and looked at him directly, and said, What do you need? I need to know who's still with me. How do you find that out? I already know most of it, he said. I've known some of it for weeks. What I didn't know until today was how far along the process is. And now you know. Farther than I let myself believe, he said. She looked at him for a moment. There was something in her face that was not pity and was not sympathy in the soft, ineffective sense. It was something harder and more useful than sympathy. It was the look of someone who had learned through the specific education of difficult situations that there is a difference between feeling sorry for a person and actually helping them. You have time, she said. Whatever it is, you have time or they'd have moved already. They're waiting for something, he agreed. What are they waiting for? He thought about Seong-ho's face in the restaurant, the pause at the door, the carefully chosen word, perception. They're waiting for me to fail visibly, he said. They want an occasion, something they can point to. Then don't give them one. It's more complicated than that. I know it is, she said. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying the core of it is that simple. He almost told her to leave. He held the impulse, examined it, and recognized it for what it was, reflex, not reason. The trained response to proximity that had kept him isolated for 6 months and had accomplished nothing. The man who's doing this, he said, I made him. I know, she said. You don't know. I know you did, she said. I can tell from the way you talk around it. People only avoid a topic that precisely when it costs them something to acknowledge. Min-jae looked at the window. The mist had thickened on the ridge. 19 years, he said. She said nothing. He was 23. He came out of Dongdaemun with raw instincts and no structure. I gave him the structure. I gave him access, resources, authority. I gave him the kind of education in this business that most men in my position do not give their lieutenants, because it creates exactly the vulnerability it has created. Why did you? He was quiet for a moment. Because he reminded me of something. Of what? Of how I was, he said. At 23, before I knew what I was building. Amara absorbed this without comment. Outside, the garden was going dark early under the cloud cover, the pine trees along the south wall losing definition in the descending mist. Does he know you as well as you know him? She said. He thinks he does. Is he right? A pause. No. Then you have something he doesn't, she said. He has numbers, Min-jae said. Whatever else, he has numbers. She nodded. She sat with this for a moment. Then, what can I do? Nothing, he said. Don't do that, she said. Do what? Put me outside it, she said. I'm already inside it. I've been inside it since I walked through your door. I live in this house. I know your schedule, your medications, your sleep pattern, what your face looks like when the nerve pain is bad, and what it looks like when you're making a decision. Anyone who wants to hurt you would look at me and see a vulnerability, so don't pretend I'm outside it. He looked at her. She was right. He had been aware of this risk in the abstract, aware that her presence created an exposure, that in his world proximity to him was not protective but dangerous, and he had allowed himself to not fully address it, which was its own kind of error. After the explosion, he said slowly, I understood something. The people closest to me are the most useful targets. I'm not afraid, she said. I know you're not, he said. That's not the same as not being in danger. She held his eye. What are you saying? I'm saying that when this moves, and it will move in the next 2 weeks, you should not be here. I'm not leaving, she said. Amara. I'm not leaving, she said again, and her voice did not rise and did not harden. It simply became a different kind of statement. The kind that is not an argument and is not a refusal, but is simply a fact that has been decided and placed on the table. You're going to need medical support. You're going to need someone who knows your body and your medications and what to do when the spasms hit at 2 a.m. in the middle of whatever happens. I'm not leaving you without that. He wanted to push back. He organized the words for it and felt them dissolve before they reached his mouth. Then stay out of any conversation about the organization, he said. If anyone comes to this house, who I have not personally confirmed, do not answer questions. Do not indicate that you know anything. Understood, she said. I mean it. I said understood, she said. The following 4 days were quiet in the way that weather is sometimes quiet. The particular stillness that exists because the system is reorganizing itself, not because it has resolved. Min-jae began working the phones in the early mornings, before Amara arrived, making contact with the men he still trusted through a series of indirect channels that Seong-ho's surveillance would not easily detect. He spoke in oblique language, discussing the maintenance schedules of buildings, the inventory requirements of the logistics contracts, and the men on the other end of the line understood what was being discussed because they had operated in this register for years. He was building a count. He needed to know this actual number before anything else was possible. The news from the count was not good. Of the 18 senior-level men who constituted the Baekryong syndicate's operational backbone, 11 had either actively aligned with Seong-ho's faction or were sitting in a position of calculated neutrality that amounted to the same thing. 4 were reliably with Min-jae. 3 he could not read. 11 against 4, with 3 unknown. Against a man who had been managing the organization's day-to-day operations for 6 months and had accordingly positioned himself in every structural choke point that mattered. Min-jae ran this calculation many times. He looked at it from different angles, as he always did, not hoping to change the numbers but to understand what the numbers actually meant, which was rarely what they appeared to mean on the surface. What they meant, when he had looked long enough, was that a direct confrontation would fail. He could not win a direct confrontation. He did not have the manpower, and he did not have the mobility and the mythology of Kang Min-jae, the legendary name, the 30 years of accumulated fear and respect, had been eroding steadily for 6 months in the absence of physical presence to anchor it. He needed something else. He needed Seong-ho to commit to a move in the wrong direction. He needed to give him an occasion that looked like an opportunity. On the 5th day, Dong-hyun came to him with information that Min-jae had not requested, and that arrived, therefore, with the particular weight of the unexpected. One of the neutral 3, a man named Bae Jun-sik, who ran the financial services operation, had contacted Dong-hyun directly and asked, through careful language, whether there was a channel to speak with Min-jae privately. Min-jae had Dong-hyun arrange it for the following evening. Bae Jun-sik arrived at the mansion at 9 p.m. through the garden entrance, which avoided the street cameras. He was a precise, bespectacled man in his mid-40s who had always struck Min-jae as someone whose specific talent was for making himself overlooked, a man who had built a career inside a criminal organization on the strength of being so thoroughly unremarkable in presentation that people tended to forget he was in the room. He sat across from Min-jae and said without preamble, "Seong-ho is planning to act at the Incheon meeting next week." Min-jae said nothing. "He has 10 men confirmed," Bae said. "He intends to—" A pause. The careful word-choosing of a man who is telling a truth he is not fully comfortable telling. "He intends to present the organization with a transition, a formal change of leadership." "A vote," Min-jae said. "Not a vote," Bae said. "A presentation. He expects the weight of numbers to be sufficient. He doesn't believe a direct confrontation will be necessary." "He's wrong about that," Min-jae said. Bae looked at his hands. "There's something else." "Tell me." "He's arranged for your access codes to the security system to be invalidated before the meeting. The mansion system. He has a contact inside the security company." Bae stopped. "I became aware of this 3 days ago. I needed time to decide." Min-jae absorbed this. The mansion's security system. The cameras, the gate controls, the motion sensors, the perimeter alerts. If the access codes were invalidated, the house was effectively blind. Not just him, but everyone inside it. Everyone. "When?" he said. "He hasn't fixed a date," Bae said. "The Incheon meeting is Thursday. I believe it happens before Thursday." After Bae left, Min-jae sat in the study for a long time. The house was quiet. Amar had finished her shift and was in the guest room she had been occupying since Min-jae had told her the situation required her to stay on site, a conversation they had conducted in the efficient, undramatic way they conducted most things. He looked at the door of the guest room at the end of the corridor. He thought about what it meant that Seong-ho had planned for the security system. Seong-ho was not planning a vote. He was planning something that required the house to be blind first. Min-jae wheeled himself to the guest room door and knocked twice. Amara opened it. She was dressed, not sleeping. She had not been sleeping. He could tell by the clarity of her face and the absence of the particular adjustment people make when they have been woken. She looked at his face and waited. "Something is going to happen," he said. "Before Thursday. I don't know the exact timing." She looked at him. "What kind of something?" He told her. He told her about Baejun Sik, about the security system, about the numbers. He told her more than he had told anyone in 6 months, more than he had intended to, the information moving out of him with a directness that surprised him even as it happened. When he finished, Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You need to call the 4 men you trust tonight." "I've already thought of that." "And you need a backup system for the house," she said. "Something offline that Seong-ho's contact can't touch." "Also already thought of." "Then what did you come here to tell me?" she said. He held her eye. The corridor was dark behind him, the mansion quiet around them both, and the weight of the next 72 hours was in the space between them as a physical thing. "I came to tell you to be ready," he said. "When it starts, it will start fast." Amara nodded slowly. "I'll be ready." He turned the chair. He was almost back to the study when she said quietly, "Min-jae." He stopped. "You came and told me yourself," she said. "You didn't send Dong-hyun. You didn't leave a note." He didn't answer. "I noticed," she said. He went back to the study and closed the door and began making calls. And outside the mansion, the city of Seoul moved through its nighttime operations, indifferent and enormous, and somewhere on the other side of it, Park Seong-ho was doing the same, making calls, moving pieces, counting men, and the distance between them was no longer measurable in the ordinary units of time and geography, but in something else entirely, the specific contracting distance between a decision and its consequence, with no road back from either side. The calls took until 2 in the morning. Min-jae worked through the list methodically, using 3 different phones and 2 relay numbers that Seong-ho's people would need time to trace, even if they were actively monitoring, which he assumed they were. The 4 men he trusted, Dong-hyun, a logistics coordinator named Hwang Tae-young, a field supervisor named Lim Cheol, and an older man who went by the name Cha, and who had been with Min-jae since before the syndicate had a name, each received a specific set of instructions in the oblique operational language they had used for years. The instructions were simple in structure and complex in implication. Each man was told to move to a specific position by Wednesday morning and to wait for a signal that Min-jae would send through a channel Seong-ho did not know existed. A secondary communication line that Min-jae had maintained in reserve for 11 years without ever using it. A contingency built during a period when he had understood, in the abstract, that the day might come when his primary network was compromised. He had built it for an external threat. He had not anticipated needing it for this. After the calls, he sat in the study and did not sleep. He ran through the variables, who Baejun Sik actually was in this situation. Whether the man's information was accurate or was itself a piece of misdirection. What Seong-ho gained from feeding him false intelligence about the timing. He rotated the problem, looked at its underside, pressed on the places where the logic was soft. The security system was the critical variable. If Seong-ho had genuinely arranged to invalidate the access codes, the timing of that invalidation would tell Min-jae something essential about when the move was coming. If the system went dark on Tuesday, Thursday's meeting was real. If it went dark sooner, Seong-ho was moving before the meeting, using the meeting as cover for something that happened earlier. At 4 in the morning, Min-jae pulled up the security system's administrative panel on his laptop and ran a diagnostic. Everything operational. He set up an alert to notify him the moment any access credential in the system was modified, routing the notification to the secondary phone that Seong-ho's contact at the security company would not know to look for. Then he closed the laptop and sat in the dark and listened to the house. The nerve pain was cycling again. He let it. He breathed through it with the particular controlled rhythm Amara had shown him, not fighting the sensation, but not surrendering to it either, treating it as information rather than emergency. It helped, marginally. He was not going to tell her that it helped. He was still awake when the house began to lighten around 6 a.m., and he heard Amara moving in the kitchen, the particular sound of her morning routine, the coffee maker, the cabinet where the medications were, the soft percussion of a spoon against a ceramic mug. He had learned to map her presence in the house by sound, the way he had always mapped environments by the secondary information they produced. She brought coffee to the study without being asked, and set it on the desk and looked at him with the calibrated attention she brought to medical assessment and said, "You didn't sleep." "No." "Pain level." "Manageable." She looked at his hands, which were resting on the desk in the position they adopted when he had been holding the same posture for too long, slightly rigid, the tendons visible. "You need to eat something before the medications," she said. "I'll make something." "I'm not hungry." "That's not what I asked," she said, and went back to the kitchen. He drank the coffee and looked at the secondary phone and waited. The alert came at 9:17 a.m. It was a single notification, one access credential modified in the security system. Not invalidated, modified, rerouted. Someone with administrative access had changed the output pathway for the motion sensor alerts on the north perimeter, redirecting them from Min-jae's primary monitoring account to an address he didn't recognize. Not a shutdown. A redirect. Xiang-ho wasn't going to cut the system. He was going to watch it himself. He was going to know when the north perimeter was triggered before Min-jae did. Min-jae sat with this for a moment. He turned it over. The north perimeter was the garden side wall, the side with the service entrance, the side through which Bai Jun-sik had arrived the previous evening. Xiang-ho knew about Bai Jun-sik's visit. He had either surveilled it or Bai Jun-sik had told him. He picked up one of the phones and called Dong Hyun. "Bai Jun-sik," he said. A pause on the line. "I'll look into it." "Don't look into it," Min-jae said. "I already know. I need to know how much he told them about our conversation." Another pause. "I'll find out through a different channel." "Be careful with the channel," Min-jae said. "Assume everything connected to the organization is being monitored." He ended the call and sat still for 30 seconds, then picked up the secondary phone and sent a single-coded message to Hwang Tae-young. The word accelerate in the operational language, which meant compress the timeline by 36 hours. Amara came back with food, rice, eggs, something she had made quickly and without ceremony, and set it on the desk beside the coffee. She looked at his face and then at the phones laid out in front of him and said nothing. "Bai Jun-sik told Xiang-ho about his visit here," Min-jae said. She sat down. "He was a plant. Or he was genuinely conflicted and made the wrong decision after leaving here," Min-jae said. "The outcome is the same." "How much does Xiang-ho know?" "He knows I'm aware of his timeline," Min-jae said. "He knows I've been making calls. He's redirected the north perimeter sensor, which means he's watching this house, and he expected me to use the garden entrance for secure visitors." He paused. "He knows more than I gave him credit for." Amara was quiet for a moment. "What does that change?" "Everything operational," he said. "The positions I asked the 4 men to take, those need to change. The communication channel needs to change. If Xiang-ho was watching through Bai, he may have the relay numbers." "How long do you have?" "I don't know," he said. "That's the problem." She looked at the food on the desk. "Eat," she said. "Your hands are shaking." He looked at his hands. They were, slightly, not from fear, but from the combination of sleeplessness and low blood sugar and the sustained adrenaline of the last 18 hours, the physiological cost of running a crisis on a body that was already managing a permanent injury and a discontinued sleep cycle. He picked up the chopsticks and ate, and the act of eating was mechanical and utilitarian, and he was aware of Amara watching him with the specific quality of attention she brought to his physical condition. Not intrusive, not pitying, simply present and tracking. "I need you to do something," he said between bites. "Tell me. If anyone comes to this house today who I haven't personally confirmed, don't open the door. Don't speak to them through the intercom. Come directly to me." "Okay." "And the medication cabinet," he said. "Lock it and keep the key." She frowned. "Why the cabinet?" "Because I don't know who has been in this house in the last 6 months when I was sleeping," he said. "I don't know what's been touched." She went very still. He watched her process this, watched her understand what he was implying, and watched her face move through something that was not quite fear, but was its more functional cousin, the recognition of a danger that has been closer than previously understood. "The medications I've been giving you," she said, "are almost certainly fine," he said. "I'm not saying they're not. I'm saying lock the cabinet and keep the key until this is over." She stood and went to the cabinet without another word, and he heard the lock engage and the key come off the hook, and then she came back to the doorway of the study and said, "Is there anything else you should have told me earlier that you haven't told me yet?" He looked at her. "Probably." "Tell me now." "The man who arranged the bomb 18 months ago," he said. "The assassination attempt. I never identified him with certainty." The silence that followed had a particular texture. "You think it's Seong-ho," she said. "I think it's possible," he said. "I think if it is, then this isn't about a leadership transition. This is about finishing what he started." She stood in the doorway with the medication cabinet key in her hand and looked at him, and for the first time since she had arrived in his house, he saw something cross her face that wasn't the steady, controlled competence she wore like a second skin. It was a flash of something rawer than that, something that processed what he had just said and understood what it meant for the both of them. It lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then it was gone. "Okay," she said. "What do we do?" Before he could answer, the secondary phone vibrated on the desk. It was a message from Hwang Tae-young, and it contained 3 words in the operational language that Min-jae had never expected to receive through that channel. Words that he had established as a signal for a specific and catastrophic scenario, a scenario he had designed the contingency system to address but had considered, when he built it, to be a remote possibility. The 3 words meant, "We have been found." Min-jae read the message twice. Then he looked up at Amara. "Get whatever you need from your room," he said. "We have maybe 30 minutes. 30 minutes until what?" "Until they come." She moved. She didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate at the threshold. She turned and went down the corridor with the fast, efficient movement of someone who had decided, and Min-jae picked up the secondary phone and called Lim Cheol, the field supervisor, who answered on the second ring. "Hwang's position is compromised," Min-jae said. "I know," Lim said. "They picked up Tae-young 40 minutes ago. 3 vehicles. I'm watching from the north side of the block." Min-jae's chest did something. He pressed through it. "Where are you?" "I can be at the service entrance in 8 minutes. "The service entrance is being monitored." A pause. "The east wall, then. There's a maintenance access point on the east wall behind the transformer housing. I'll need someone inside to unlock it." "Dong-hyun will unlock it," Min-jae said. 8 minutes. He called Dong-hyun and gave the instruction and ended the call, and then sat for a moment in the study that had been his world for 6 months. The lowered desk, the reorganized shelving, the medication cabinet that Amara had built into the east wall, with the efficiency of someone who understood that a person's physical environment shaped what was possible in it. And he understood with complete clarity that he would not be coming back to this room. Not to this version of it, not to the version of himself that had existed inside it. Amara came back with a bag, compact and practical, the kind of packing that communicated she had thought about this before today. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them in that look that had no efficient language. Something about the distance between the woman who had walked in 22 minutes late with a broken bag strap and unpaid bills, and this moment, and what had happened to both of them in between. "Lim Cheol is coming through the east wall," he said. 8 minutes. "Okay," she said. "Can you go fast in the chair?" "Fast enough." "I'll be beside you." They moved through the house, Minji through the widened corridors that had been built for the wheelchair, Amara beside him, the bag over her shoulder, and the house was quiet around them in the specific way of a place that does not yet know what is coming. The kitchen they passed through still had the morning's coffee cups on the counter. The study door was open behind them. They reached the east corridor and Dong-hyun was already there, moving ahead to the maintenance access panel in the outer wall that Min-jae had known about for years and had never needed to use. Dong-hyun had the panel open by the time they arrived. and through the gap came the cold morning air of the garden's east side, the smell of concrete and damp ground, and the city beyond the wall. Lim Chol came through first, a lean man in his 40s with the careful economy of movement that distinguished men who had spent years operating in contested spaces. He looked at Min Jae and then at Amara and gave the brief assessment nod of someone cataloging a situation and moving on. "Vehicle is on the side street behind the transformer housing," Lim said. 60 seconds to reach it. No observed coverage on that side yet. "Yet," Min Jae said. "Yet," Lim confirmed. Min Jae looked at the gap in the wall. The chair would fit. Barely, but the terrain beyond was rough, the ground uneven between the wall and the street, and he felt the particular calculus of the disability in a crisis context, the arithmetic of what his body could and could not do, and what it required of the people around him, and what that requirement cost in terms of time and exposure. He looked at Amara. "Don't," she said, reading his face. "We're going together." They went through the gap. Lim went first, and then Dong-hyun helped navigate the chair over the uneven ground, and Amara was on the other side of the chair, her hand on the push handle, not pushing but steadying, and the 60 seconds to the vehicle were the longest 60 seconds Min Jae had experienced since the explosion. They reached the car. Lim had it running. The transfer from the chair to the rear seat took 11 seconds, and Min Jae counted them. A reflex, the counting, the measurement of exposure time, and then the chair was folded and in the trunk, and Amara was beside him, and Dong-hyun was in the passenger seat, and Lim pulled out of the side street with the controlled, unhurried speed of a driver who understood that fast attracts attention. Min Jae looked back through the rear window at the corner of the wall as they turned. Nothing yet on the street. No vehicles, no movement. They drove for 4 minutes in silence. Then Lim said, without turning his head, "There's something you need to know." Min Jae looked at the back of his head. "Hwang Tae-young," Lim said. "Before they picked him up, he made a call. I was monitoring because I was watching his position. He made a call to a number that's registered to one of Seong-ho's secondary contacts. The interior of the car was very quiet." "How long before they picked him up?" Min Jae said. "The call was 40 minutes before," Lim said. "Maybe 42. Min Jae looked at the passing street. He looked at the back of Dong-hyun's head. He looked at Lim's profile in the rearview mirror, the particular stillness of the man's face as he drove. He thought about the 4 men he trusted. He had chosen them through a calculation that he had believed was sound. Men tested in situations where betrayal had been profitable and who had not betrayed him. Hwang Tae-young had been one of them. Had been the one he had sent the accelerate signal to this morning. Hwang Tae-young, who had made a call to one of Seong-ho's numbers 40 minutes before Seong-ho's people picked him up, who had then sent Min Jae the 3-word warning message, who had perhaps been instructed to send exactly that message, to produce exactly this result. Min Jae abandoning the mansion, leaving the controlled environment, moving into the open in a vehicle with 3 men, one of whom he had just learned had been monitoring Hwang's communications. He looked at Lim Chol's eyes in the rearview mirror. Lim met his gaze, held it for 2 seconds, then returned his eyes to the road. Min Jae put his hand on Amara's arm. A light pressure, brief, the kind that communicates be still, be ready, without words, and felt her register it without moving, without changing the configuration of her face or her body. He looked at Dong-hyun's profile, at the set of the man's shoulders. He thought about the mansion's security system, modified to redirect the north perimeter alerts. He thought about Bae-jun-sik, who had arrived through the north perimeter. He thought about the relay numbers on the phones, and who else had known them. He thought about 9 years. The length of time Dong-hyun had worked for him. The length of time a careful man with good instincts and no observable ambition could spend in a position of total domestic access, learning the architecture of a life, waiting for the moment when the architecture was needed by someone else. The car was moving north on a road Min Jae knew well. In approximately 3 minutes, it would pass through an intersection where, if it turned right, it would head toward the safe house that Lim had said the vehicle was driving toward. If it turned left, it would head toward a district in Dobong-gu, where the Baekryong syndicate had a secondary facility that Min-jae had not discussed with anyone in the last 48 hours. He watched the intersection approach through the windshield. The car turned left. Amar's arm went rigid under his hand, and Min-jae pressed once, still, and she held, and the car moved through the turn with the same unhurried speed, and Min-jae sat in the back seat of a vehicle driven by a man he could no longer evaluate, beside the only person in Seoul whose loyalty he was certain of, with no weapon, no working communication channel to anyone outside this car, no functioning security network, and a body that could not run. 31 years of building an empire, and it had come to this: a back seat, a wrong turn, and the specific quality of silence that exists in the moment before a trap closes. The car turned left and kept moving, and Min-jae watched the street outside the window with the focused external calm of a man who has trained himself over decades to keep his body's signals from reaching his face. Inside, he was running the calculation. Lim Cheol was driving at a consistent speed, not accelerating, not varying the route in a way that suggested nervousness, which meant either Lim didn't know that Min-jae had registered the wrong turn, or Lim knew and had determined that it didn't matter. Both possibilities led to the same place, the facility in Dobong-gu, Seong-ho's people. Whatever Seong-ho had decided to do with the opportunity that Hwang Tae-young and Bae Jun-sik, and however many others, had spent months constructing. Min-jae looked at the back of Dong-hyun's head. 9 years. The specific arithmetic of that number, the access it represented, the knowledge, the accumulated daily presence of a man in every room of his life. His medication schedule, his sleep patterns, the secondary phone, the relay numbers, the east wall maintenance access point that Lim had navigated to without hesitation. He pressed Amara's arm once more and felt her breathe, controlled, deliberate, the breath of someone who was afraid and was not allowing the fear to make decisions for her. He had approximately 4 minutes before the car reached Dobong-gu. He looked at his hands in his lap. He cataloged what he had. 2 phones, both compromised. The wheelchair, folded in the trunk. No weapon. The knowledge, precise and operational, of how Park Seong-ho thought. 19 years of watching the man build decisions. The specific architecture of how he weighted risk against reward. What he considered an acceptable exposure. Seong-ho was controlled. Seong-ho did not improvise. He built systems and followed them, which made him predictable in the way that all methodical men were predictable once you understood the method. And he had Amara, who was sitting beside him with the medication key still in her jacket pocket, and the compact bag on her lap, and the specific quality of stillness that Min-jae had come to understand was not passivity, but the opposite of it. The stillness of a person gathering rather than waiting. He leaned slightly toward her and said, very quietly, close enough that the front seat would not catch it over the road noise, "When the car stops, stay in the vehicle until I tell you." Her jaw tightened fractionally. She wanted to argue. He felt it. She held it. "If something happens to me," he said, "the name Cha. Old man, he operates out of the Mapo fish market. Give him my name and tell him the contingency word is white pine. He'll know what to do." She turned and looked at him directly. Her eyes were doing something he had not seen them do before. Not fear, something past fear, something that had burned through fear and come out the other side as a kind of fierce, furious clarity. "Nothing is going to happen to you," she said. "I need you to hold that name anyway." Cha, white pine. I've got it. She paused. "Now tell me what you're going to do." "I'm going to talk to Seong-ho," he said. "That's it? Talk." "For now," he said. "Yes." The car slowed. They were entering a commercial district. Warehouses, light industrial buildings, the kind of Dobong-gu block that existed in every major city in the world, the urban tissue that nobody photographs, the functional, ugly infrastructure of a place that moves things and stores things and asks no questions. The facility was a converted logistics building that the syndicate had held through a freight company for 7 years, and as the car pulled toward the loading entrance, Min-jae saw the vehicles already there, 4 of them, dark, positioned in the pattern of people who have arrived to receive something rather than to conduct a meeting. Lim stopped the car. He put it in park and sat for a moment without speaking. "Lim," Min-jae said. Lim looked in the rearview mirror. How long? Min-jae said. A pause. Long enough to be an answer. 7 months, Lim said. He had the grace, at least, to hold Min-jae's eyes in the mirror when he said it. After the explosion, Seong-ho came to me. What did he offer? Position, Lim said. The operations director role. And he stopped. And what? He said you were finished, Lim said. He was convincing. Min-jae looked at him for a moment. 7 months, which meant Lim had been in Seong-ho's network since before Min-jae had made his list of 4 trusted men, which meant the list itself was a document he had used to navigate a minefield while believing he was on solid ground. Get out of the car, Min-jae said. Lim got out. 2 men appeared from the building entrance and pulled the rear doors open, and Min-jae was looking at faces he recognized. Lower-level operational men, the kind who did what they were told and asked questions only about the specifics of execution. One of them reached for the wheelchair in the trunk with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been told to manage the logistics of this. They were being handled, efficiently, professionally, without visible aggression, which was, Min-jae understood, a deliberate communication. We are in control. This does not need to be violent, yet. He transferred to the wheelchair with the practiced economy he had developed over 6 months, declining the hand that was offered, and Amara came around the vehicle and stood beside him, and one of the men stepped toward her, and she looked at him with an expression so flat and so direct that the man actually paused. She stays with me, Min-jae said. No one argued. They moved toward the building entrance. Inside, the facility had the particular atmosphere of industrial spaces repurposed for human assembly. The high ceilings and concrete floors, and the cold that those materials hold regardless of season, the overhead lighting that illuminates without warming. Folding tables had been set up in the central space, and around them stood the men that Seong-ho had gathered, the section heads from Thursday's meeting, additional operational personnel, perhaps 22 men in total. And at the far end of the space, standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face arranged in the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion he has been working toward for a long time, was Park Seong-ho. He looked older than he had on Thursday, or perhaps Min-jae was simply seeing him differently now, without the 19 years of accumulated investment distorting the image, without the thing that proximity does to perception, the way it softens edges and fills gaps with assumption. Seong-ho looked at Min-jae. He looked at Amara. He did not look surprised by either. You made good time, he said. I wasn't sure about the east wall access. I thought you might try the main gate. The east wall was your suggestion, Min-jae said. Through Lim. Through Lim, Seong-ho confirmed. He moved toward them, unhurried, stopping 8 feet away. I wanted you here rather than running. Running would have been messy. What is this? Min-jae said. You know what it is. I want to hear you say it. Seong-ho looked at him for a moment. It's a transition, he said. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. You understand transitions. You've conducted several yourself. You know how they work when they're done cleanly. Cleanly, Min-jae said. You step back, Seong-ho said. Formally, publicly. The organization acknowledges the change. You keep the properties, the private financial arrangements, whatever is reasonable for a man in your position. You live comfortably. Nothing else needs to happen. The room was very quiet. 22 men, and the particular silence of people who have already decided something and are now watching the formality of its execution. Min-jae looked at Seong-ho. He looked at the face he had known for 19 years. The controlled features, the careful eyes, the absolute management of expression that Min-jae had once valued as a professional quality and was now reading for what it actually was. The bomb, Min-jae said. Something moved in Seong-ho's face. Very brief. That was not the bomb 18 months ago, Min-jae said. Was it you? The silence shifted. Several of the men in the room registered it. The question, the weight of it, the specific implication of what an answer would mean about the history of the last 18 months. Seong-ho said, That's not what this conversation is about. It is now, Min-jae said. In front of all these men. Was it you? Seong-ho's jaw tightened. He looked at Min-jae with an expression that had moved past the managed professional surface into something rawer. The look of a man who had planned for many scenarios and had not apparently planned for being asked this particular question this directly in this setting. The organization needed to move, Seong-ho said. You were holding it in a structure that had stopped being viable. The direction you were taking, the de-escalation, the reduction of core operations, the pivot toward legitimate business, you were going to dismantle everything we built. So yes, Min-jae said. Yes, Seong-ho said. The word came out hard and flat and final, like something that had been held under pressure for a long time and was now simply released. Yes, it was me. And the driver died because he was in the wrong place, and I have lived with that, and I would make the same decision again because the alternative was watching you take 30 years of work and bury it. The room had stopped breathing. Min-jae sat in the wheelchair in the cold industrial light and looked at the man he had built and felt something in his chest that was not grief and was not rage, but was the specific pain of a calculation that has been running wrong for 18 months and has finally resolved to its correct answer. The driver's name had been Kim Sang-won. He had worked for Min-jae for 6 years. He had a daughter in Busan who was 11 years old. So, Seong-ho said, pulling the word back to the present, with the focused energy of a man reclaiming control of a room that has gone sideways. The question on the table remains. You step back, or we have a different conversation. What's the different conversation? Min-jae said. Seong-ho looked at Amara. It involves people you've allowed to get close to you, he said, which was a vulnerability I didn't expect. You were always careful about that before. Amara said nothing. She was standing beside the wheelchair with her bag still over her shoulder and her eyes on Seong-ho, and her breathing was controlled and visible. Min-jae could see the movement of it in her chest. But her face was giving nothing. Don't, Min-jae said. Then be reasonable, Seong-ho said. You have no network. You have no operational capacity. You have he paused. 3 men, as of this morning, and a caregiver, and a wheelchair. Be reasonable, Min-jae. You want me to step back, Min-jae said. Yes. In front of these men. Yes. And if I don't? Seong-ho held his gaze. He didn't answer, which was itself the answer. Min-jae looked at the room. He looked at the 22 men, the section heads, the operational personnel. He looked at Lim Cheol standing near the entrance with the expression of a man who has done a thing and is now waiting to find out what it cost. He looked at Kwon Dae-soo from the Thursday meeting, who was standing with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, which told Min-jae something. He looked at the architecture of the room, the positions of the men, the 2 exits he could see and the loading dock door to the east that would be the 3rd. He looked at the tables and what was on them and what was not on them. He looked at where Seong-ho was standing relative to where Min-jae was sitting, the 8 feet between them, the geometry of the space. He had asked Seong-ho to say it plainly in the Thursday meeting. Seong-ho had said it plainly. Min-jae had a specific appreciation for plainness. It made the geometry cleaner. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. Every man in the room tensed, hands moved, eyes sharpened. Min-jae removed the secondary phone and held it up so the room could see it. Nothing else. Just the phone. I want to play something, he said. Seong-ho's eyes narrowed. Put it down. I've been recording, Min-jae said, since Yongsan, the restaurant on Thursday, the car this morning, and this room from the moment we walked in. He looked at Seong-ho. I want to play it for the men in this room. That's a bluff, Seong-ho said. Try me. Seong-ho looked at the phone. He looked at Min-jae's face. He was doing the calculation. The same calculation Min-jae had run about him for 19 years. The one where you looked at a man and tried to determine whether what you were seeing was genuine or performed, whether the stillness was confidence or something else. The recording goes to 3 external locations the moment this phone loses signal or goes offline, Min-jae said. Police contacts. A journalist in Jongno who has been waiting for something specific about a car bombing 18 months ago, and the Hwang network in Daejeon who would find the information about your approach to their partnership offer very illuminating. The room was doing something. Min-jae could feel it. Not see it, not hear it, but feel it in the way he had always felt the movement of rooms, the physics of collective attention shifting its weight. Seong-ho's hands came out of his jacket pockets. "You had nothing when you walked in here." "I had everything when I walked in here," Min-jae said. "I've had it for 4 days. The question was whether I needed to use it." "The recording is a bluff," Seong-ho said, but the word bluff came out with a different weight than it had the first time. Slightly effortful, the weight of a word being used to convince the speaker as much as the audience. "Kwon Dae-soo," Min-jae said. Kwon looked up from the floor. "You've been in this organization for 14 years, Min-jae said. "You built the Northern District from 6 blocks to 31. I gave you the resources for that. I gave you the decision-making authority." He paused. "You heard what he just said. You heard him confirm the bomb. You heard the name Kim Song-won's death reduced to a logistical calculation." He looked at Kwon steadily. "Is that the organization you signed on to?" Kwon said nothing, but his arms had uncrossed. "Enough," Seong-ho said. His voice had changed, but the professional management of it was fraying at the edges, the control requiring more visible effort. He turned to the men nearest to him and said, "Take the phone." Nobody moved. Seong-ho turned and looked at the room, and the room looked back at him, and the moment extended for 3 full seconds in which the geometry of the space rearranged itself completely. Then 2 things happened simultaneously. The loading dock door to the east opened, and Cha walked in. He was 63 years old, a small man with white hair and the unhurried movements of someone who has been in enough rooms like this that the atmosphere of them no longer registered as anything requiring an adjustment in pace. Behind him came 4 men, not the young operational personnel that Seong-ho had assembled, but older men. Men who had been in the syndicate since before several of the section heads had joined it. Men whose presence in a room communicated a specific and undeniable form of institutional memory. Seong-ho stared at him. "How? Mapo Fish Market," Min-jae said. "I called him Monday. Not through the relay numbers, through a channel that's been inactive for 11 years. He looked at Seong-ho. "The contingency I built when I was 33 years old and understood for the first time that the most dangerous threats come from inside." Seong-ho's face went through something that had no name in the professional vocabulary. A sequence of calculations all producing wrong answers, the expression of a methodical man whose method has been countered at every point by a version of it he didn't know existed. "The recording," Min-jae said. "Seong-ho, it's not a bluff." Seong-ho looked at the phone. He looked at Cha and the men behind him. He looked at Kwon Dae-soo, who had taken 2 steps to the left, which in the geometry of this room meant 2 steps away from Seong-ho's side. He looked at the section heads one by one and read in their faces what Min-jae had already read. The specific recalibration of men who had bet on an outcome and were watching the odds change in real time. He looked at Min-jae. "You can't run this organization from that chair," Seong-ho said. His voice was stripped of management now. Raw and direct. "You know you can't. Whatever happens today, whatever you do with that recording, the structural problem doesn't go away. You can't be what this requires." "You're right," Min-jae said. Seong-ho blinked. "I can't run it the way I ran it before," Min-jae said. "That version of the organization is over. I've known that for 4 months. The question was never whether to change it. The question was who controls the change." He held Seong-ho's eyes. "It's going to be me." Seong-ho looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the room, the assembled men, the shifted geometry. Cha's 4 at the loading dock, Kwon Dae-soo's repositioned weight. He looked at Amara, who was still standing beside Min-jae's chair, with her bag on her shoulder and her eyes tracking the room with the alert precision of someone who has been paying attention to every detail since the car made a wrong turn. He looked at Min-jae one final time, and in his face was something that was almost not regret. Seong-ho was not built for regret, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who had planned with great thoroughness for a future that is not going to occur. Then one of Seong-ho's remaining loyal men, a young operational soldier near the east wall, too young to have learned how to read a room that had already decided, too eager or too afraid to wait, reached for the weapon at his hip. Amara moved before Min-jae could speak. She dropped the bag and drove her shoulder into Min-jae's chair, pushing it hard to the left behind the cover of the nearest table. And the motion was so fast and so committed that Min-jae's hand slammed against the table edge, and the phone skidded across the concrete floor, and the sound of the weapon discharging was enormous in the industrial space. A single shot, high, hitting the ceiling and raining concrete dust down on the men below. And then Cha's 4 men were moving, and the room erupted into the specific controlled violence of people who know what they are doing. Min-jae grabbed the table edge and held position and looked for Amara. She was on the floor beside the chair, her shoulder against the wheel, her head down. He reached for her arm, and she looked up at him, and her face was intact, present, unhurt. She had a cut above her left eyebrow from the concrete floor where she had gone down, a thin red line that was beginning to bead, and she was breathing hard, the breath finally uncontrolled, finally running its own speed without management. "I'm fine," she said before he could ask. "You moved the chair," he said. "You didn't have cover. You could have been—" "I'm fine," she said again, and the intensity in it closed the sentence. Across the room, the brief violence was resolving. Seong-ho had not moved from where he stood. He was looking at the phone on the floor, the secondary phone, the 11-year contingency lying on the concrete 6 feet from where Min-jae was positioned. Looking at it with the expression of a man looking at the exact object that the entire 18-month architecture of his plan had failed to account for. Cha walked across the room and stood in front of Seong-ho. He was a small man, Cha, and he looked up at Seong-ho without any particular expression, the face of someone for whom this moment is a transaction rather than a drama. And he said, very quietly, 4 words. Min-jae could not hear what the 4 words were. He watched Seong-ho's face receive them. He watched Seong-ho's shoulders drop by approximately 1 centimeter. A small movement, barely visible. But Min-jae had known his body for 19 years and knew what 1 centimeter of dropped shoulder meant in the language of this man. It meant it was over. Amara was pulling herself upright beside the chair, one hand on the wheel, the cut on her forehead beginning to run, and she looked at Min-jae, and he looked at her in the settling chaos of the room. The dust still drifting from the ceiling, the men repositioning, Kwon Dae-soo already moving toward Cha with the expression of a man formalizing a decision he made 60 seconds ago. And between them in that look was the weight of everything that had happened since a woman with a broken bag strap had walked 22 minutes late into his study and told him she was going to treat him like a person. Min-jae reached up and pressed his thumb against the cut above her eyebrow, applying pressure the way she had shown him to apply pressure in the first week, in a different context, in a version of his life that felt like it belonged to someone who no longer existed. She winced. She didn't pull back. "You need stitches," he said. "Later," she said. "Now," he said. She looked at him. The room was still moving around them. Voices, the sounds of men being detained, Cha's quiet authority asserting itself across the space. And Amara looked at Min-jae with the cut bleeding steadily, and the dust in her hair, and the fierce, exhausted clarity still in her eyes. And she said, "Is it done?" Min-jae looked across the room at Park Seong-ho, who was standing with Cha's men on either side of him, and the particular stillness of a man who has used up everything he had. He looked back at Amara. "Almost," he said. They took Seong-ho out through the loading dock. Min-jae watched it happen from across the room, watched Cha's men move him toward the east door with the practiced efficiency of people who have handled this kind of moment before, and watched Seong-ho walk between them without resistance, without the performance of dignity or the theater of defiance, just the flat, exhausted movement of a man who has spent everything he had and arrived at empty. At the door, Seong-ho stopped. He didn't turn around. He stood with his back to the room for a moment, his shoulders at the 1 centimeter drop that Min-jae had read as surrender, and then he said, not loudly, but in the carrying way that a controlled man's voice carries in a concrete space, "I wasn't wrong about the organization." Min-jae said nothing. "The direction you were taking it," Seong-ho said, "the de-escalation, the legitimate business pivot, I wasn't wrong that it would dismantle what we built. You were wrong about everything else, Min-jae said. A pause. Yes, Seong-ho said. I was wrong about everything else. He went through the door. It closed behind him with the heavy finality of an industrial mechanism doing what it was built to do, indifferent to the weight of what it was sealing away. The room exhaled. Kwon Soo was the first section head to approach Min-jae. He came with the careful movement of a man who understands that the ground has shifted and is not yet certain of its new configuration, and he stood 3 feet away and said, "What do you need from us?" Min-jae looked at him. He looked at the room, the remaining section heads, the operational men, Cha standing near the loading dock with his hands in his pockets, and the particular patience of someone who has been waiting for this moment for a long time and is in no hurry now that it has arrived. I need everyone here to understand something, Min-jae said. His voice was level and carried without effort in the concrete space. What happened in the last 18 months, the drift, the doubt, the men who moved towards Seong-ho, I'm not going to make a list. I'm not going to have individual conversations about loyalty and what it means. That's over. He paused. What's not over is this. Kim Sang-won's daughter is 11 years old and she's in Busan. Someone in this room is going to find out her situation and make sure it's addressed, not as payment, not as an organization expense, as a human obligation. The first person who tells me they've handled it gets to tell me personally. No one spoke, but 3 of the section heads were looking at each other with the expression of men identifying a task to be claimed. The rest, Min-jae said, we'll discuss over the next week. The direction I was moving the organization before the bomb, that direction stands. If anyone in this room has a fundamental problem with it, this is the moment to say so. Silence. Good, he said. Amara was standing near the wall where she had moved during the brief violence, and she had found something. A folded piece of clean cloth from her bag pressed against the cut above her eyebrow with the automatic self-administered care of someone who is accustomed to addressing injuries without making a production of them. The bleeding had slowed. The cut was going to need stitches, 3 or 4, and she knew it. And she was applying pressure with the measured patience of someone who has decided to handle one thing at a time. Min-jae moved the chair toward her. She watched him come. She had been watching him since the door closed behind Seong-ho, with a particular quality of attention that had nothing to do with medical assessment and everything to do with something she had not yet named and was not, in this moment, going to name. Hospital, he said when he reached her. Not yet, she said. Amara. Not yet, she said again. I need 5 minutes first, just 5 minutes where nothing is happening. He understood this. He positioned the chair beside her and they stayed against the wall while the room around them conducted its aftermath. Cha coordinating, section heads talking in low voices, the operational personnel moving through the practical work of a situation that had resolved, and neither of them spoke for a while. After 3 minutes, she said, Is Cha someone you trust? Yes. How? He's the only person who knew about the contingency system, Min-jae said. I built it with him. He's the one who would have been left holding everything if the bomb had finished what Seong-ho intended. She absorbed this. So he had reason to be loyal. He had reason, Min-jae said. But reason and loyalty aren't the same thing. I know the difference. She looked at him from the side, the cloth pressed to her forehead. You do, she said. You do know the difference. He didn't answer, but something in his face shifted. Not much. Not in a way that would have been readable to anyone who had not spent 7 weeks learning the specific vocabulary of his expressions, and Amara saw it and said nothing more. They left the facility 40 minutes later, after Cha had established the immediate operational arrangements and the section heads had dispersed with the specific purposefulness of men who have been given direction and are relieved to have it. Cha drove them himself, a deliberate choice that Min-jae registered and appreciated without acknowledging, in a vehicle that had not been part of any arrangement Seong-ho had known about. They went to a private medical clinic in Mapo-gu that Min-jae had used for years, for situations that required discretion. A doctor who asked no unnecessary questions treated Amara's forehead. 4 stitches, local anesthetic, the clean, efficient work of a man who was good at what he did, and checked Min Jae's hands, which had taken the impact of the table edge during the chair movement and had bruised across the thenar muscle in a way that was painful and temporary and required nothing except acknowledgement. In the car afterward, driving back toward Seongbuk-gu in the late afternoon light, Amara sat beside him with a small white bandage above her left eyebrow and looked out the window at the city moving past. "What happens to Seong-ho?" she said. "Cha will handle it," Min Jae said. She was quiet for a moment. "That means what, exactly?" "It means he won't be a problem," Min Jae said. "And it means the men who worked with him will know he isn't a problem. That's what it needs to mean." She turned and looked at him. He met her eyes and held them. "Does it have to be that?" she said. "In this situation," he said, "yes." She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the window. He watched her profile, the line of her jaw, the bandage, the particular set of her mouth that was not acceptance and was not refusal, but was the more complicated thing between them, the place where she held the reality of who he was and what his world required, and did not pretend it was something else. "I know what I am," he said. "I'm not asking you to." "I know what you are," she said. "I've known since the first week. That's not what I'm working through." "What are you working through?" She was quiet for a moment. The city moved past, the Han River appearing briefly between buildings, the afternoon light on the water going bronze in the low autumn sun. "I moved your chair," she said, "when that man reached for the weapon. I didn't think about it. I just moved." "I know," he said. "I've never done something like that before," she said, without thinking, just moved. "I know," he said again. She was quiet. "That tells me something about where I am," she said, "with this, with you. And I'm working through what that means." The car was quiet for a moment. Cha's eyes were forward, professionally elsewhere. "It doesn't have to mean anything you're not ready for it to mean," Min Jae said. She turned and looked at him with an expression that was almost exasperated, almost, with the ghost of something warmer underneath it. "That's not how it works," she said. "You can't decide what something means or doesn't mean. It means what it means. I'm just catching up to it." He said nothing. But the thing in his chest that had been living there for weeks, the thing he had been filing in the category of complications, of problems to be managed, of vulnerabilities he could not afford, shifted into a different category, one he didn't have a name for yet, one that didn't feel like a vulnerability. The mansion in Seongbuk-gu had not been touched. This was the first thing Min Jae confirmed when they arrived. Cha had sent 2 men ahead to sweep the property, and the report was that Seong-ho's people had not acted on the house. They had not needed to. The plan had been the car, the facility, the managed transition in front of the assembled organization. The house had been irrelevant to that plan. Walking back through his own front door, being wheeled through it, the specific geometry of that, the width of the door frame that had been modified for exactly this, Min Jae felt something he had not expected to feel. He felt the place as his again. For 6 months it had been a territory he occupied, and a cage he resented, and a fortress he maintained out of necessity. Coming back to it now, through the east corridor and past the kitchen with Amara's morning coffee cup still on the counter from what felt like a different day, in a different life, he felt it settle around him differently. The lowered desk in the study, the medication cabinet with its lock that Amara had engaged that morning, and that she was now unlocking with the key from her jacket pocket, her movements efficient and matter-of-fact. The window looking out at the garden where the pine trees along the south wall stood in the early evening light, holding their shape. He went to the window and stayed there for a while. Amara came and stood nearby, not beside him, giving him the space of the moment. And after a while she said, "I need to make a call." "To Atlanta," he said. "To my sister," she said. "I told her I was fine when this started, and I need her to hear my voice." "Use the main phone in the kitchen," he said. "It's clean." She went. He heard her voice in the kitchen, the particular shift in register that happened when she spoke to someone she loved, the unself-conscious warmth of it, The way she laughed once at something her sister said, with the brief, uncomplicated sound of a person who has survived a hard day and is allowing themselves to know it. He listened to it without meaning to. He let himself listen to it. Over the following days, the work of aftermath was extensive and required the kind of sustained operational attention that Min-jae had not exercised in 6 months. And the exercise of it, the calls with section heads, the restructuring conversations with Cha, the careful management of the information about Seong-ho that entered the organizational memory versus the information that was filed and sealed, occupied his mornings and most of his afternoons and asked of him exactly the quality of sustained strategic attention that had built the Baekryong syndicate in the first place. He found that the wheelchair did not impede this. He had known intellectually that it would not, had told himself this for 6 months while simultaneously treating every aspect of his life as if it did. But there was a difference between knowing and experiencing, and the experience of conducting 2 weeks of intensive organizational reconstruction from the lower desk in the study while Amara moved through the house on her schedule and brought him food at the times he forgot to eat and locked the medication cabinet every night and unlocked it every morning was the difference between those two things made physical. On the 9th day, a man from the syndicate's financial operations came to the mansion and confirmed that a monthly arrangement had been established for Kim Sang-won's daughter in Busan. The man who had arranged it was Kwon Dae-soo, and he had apparently done it within 4 hours of leaving the Dobong-gu facility. Min-jae received this information and said nothing and thanked the man and returned to his work, and later that evening he sat in the study after Amara had finished her shift, and he thought about Kim Sang-won for a long time in the quiet. He thought about the morning of the explosion, the breakfast alone, the rice and grilled fish in the silence of the 43rd floor while the city blinked awake below. He thought about what he had been that morning and the specific quality of his certainty in those days, the absolute unquestioned conviction of his own centrality, the way he had moved through the world as though its geometry organized itself around him, the way he had looked at his own empire and seen a structure so solid and so thoroughly controlled that the concept of its undoing had lived only in the abstract. He thought about the concrete embankment, the hospital ceiling, the neurosurgeon's eyes on the chart, the first wheelchair, which had been the wrong size and had caused a pressure sore on his right hip that had taken 6 weeks to heal because he had refused to acknowledge it. He thought about Seong-ho, who had sat across tables from him for 19 years and learned his methods and absorbed his logic and ultimately used both against him in a plan that had nearly worked, had worked structurally in every way except the one that mattered, the one that Seong-ho had not factored because he had learned Min-jae's methods but had not understood the part of Min-jae that existed beneath the methods. The 11-year contingency, the secondary phone, the reserve that a man builds not out of paranoia but out of the specific understanding that everything visible is vulnerable and the only protection is what cannot be seen. And he thought about a woman from Atlanta with a broken bag strap who had looked at him in the first 30 seconds and seen something that 19 years of lieutenants and organizational loyalty and accumulated institutional power had not produced in a single person. The specific willingness to see him as a man rather than a symbol, and to respond to the man rather than the symbol, and to stay beside the man when the symbol was under assault. He picked up the secondary phone from the desk. It had a crack across the lower left corner of the screen from where it had skidded across the concrete floor in the Dobong-gu facility. He looked at the crack for a moment. Then he set it back down. Amara appeared in the doorway. She had her jacket on. End of shift, the way she signaled it without announcing it, the jacket that meant she was transitioning between the professional and the personal. "You should sleep," she said. "I know. Are you going to?" Probably not immediately. She came into the room and sat across from him in the chair she had established as her chair, and she looked at him across the desk, and he looked at her, and between them was the accumulated weight of 7 weeks, the mornings, the medications, the nerve pain in the dark, the assisted exercises and the arguments about them, the conversations that had started as medical assessment and become something else entirely, the moment in the Dobong-gu facility when she had moved the chair, the 4 stitches above her left eyebrow now covered by a smaller bandage that she would stop needing in another 10 days. I want to tell you something, he said. She waited. Before you, he said, I had not had a conversation that was not about the organization or about survival in approximately 4 years. He paused, choosing the words with the same care he brought to operational planning, which was the only way he knew to handle things that mattered. I had forgotten what a conversation was for. She looked at him. What did you think it was for? Transaction, he said. Information exchange, management. And now, he held her eyes. Now I know it's for something else. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the garden was dark and the pine trees along the south wall were shapes against the ambient light of the city, and the house was settled and still around them. I'm not going back to Atlanta, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying that because of the money or because of the situation. I'm saying it because I've thought about it carefully, and I'm not going back. I know, he said. Do you? I've known for about 3 weeks, he said, and I've been trying to decide what the right thing to do with that knowledge was. What did you decide? That the right thing was to stop trying to protect you from a danger you've already chosen to be inside, he said, and to accept that some decisions are not mine to make. She looked at him for a long moment, the bandage above her eyebrow, the jacket, the particular quality of her stillness. That's the most self-aware thing you've said in 7 weeks, she said. Don't tell anyone, he said. She almost smiled, the ghost of it, at the left corner of her mouth, and it was the most human thing he had seen in a room in a very long time. 3 weeks later, Min-jae attended a formal meeting of the Baekryong Syndicate's section heads in person at the organization's primary meeting facility in Mapogu through the main entrance. He arrived 5 minutes early. The section heads were already assembled when he entered, and they stood, not the careful performed normalcy of the Yongsan restaurant, but the genuine reflex of men responding to a presence that had reasserted itself in a way that could not be managed or performed around. Kwon Dae-soo was nearest the door, and he nodded once, a nod that communicated 14 years of history and 2 weeks of aftermath and a decision made in a concrete room in Dobong-gu, and Min-jae returned it. Cha was at the far end of the table. He caught Min-jae's eye and looked away immediately, which from Cha was the equivalent of an embrace. The meeting ran for 2 hours. Min-jae directed it from the head of the table with the focused precision he had brought to every significant operational decision in 31 years of building the organization. And the difference between this meeting and the one in Yongsan was not the wheelchair, which was the same, and not the room, which was similar, and not the men, most of whom were the same. The difference was the quality of the air between them, the specific atmospheric condition of a room in which the question of authority has been resolved and what remains is the practical work of the people who have accepted it. After the meeting, he sat alone in the room for a few minutes. He looked at the table, the empty chairs, the residue of a significant conversation. He had spent 31 years building a thing that had nearly been taken from him, and in the process of nearly losing it, he had discovered that the version of it he was going to carry forward was different from the version he had been building before the explosion. Not smaller. Different. Built on a different understanding of what was worth building and why, and for how long, and at what cost. Song-ho had not been wrong that the direction would change things. He had been wrong about what the change meant. Amara was waiting in the vehicle outside. She had come with him, not because he had asked her to, and not because she was performing the role of caregiver in a context that had outgrown that definition, but because she had looked at the schedule that morning and said, "I'm coming," in the tone that did not require a response, and he had not given one. He found her in the back seat with a book open in her lap and a coffee from somewhere that smelled like it was already half cold, and she looked up when he came in and assessed his face with the automatic efficiency she brought to all observation and said, "How was it?" "Good," he said. She closed the book. She looked at his face again, more carefully. "Really good, or managing expectations good?" "Really good," he said. She nodded. She looked out the window at the street, at the Mapogu afternoon moving past in its ordinary density, and after a moment she said, "I found a physical therapy center, specialized SCI focus. They have a new program for T10 and below with better outcomes than what the standard protocols produce. It's in Seodamun." "You've been researching," he said. "For 2 weeks," she said. "I wanted to have the information when the timing was right." And the timing is right. The timing is right, she said. He looked at her. The small bandage was gone now, replaced by the clean line of the healing scar, which would fade over the next months to something barely visible. She had her hair down today. He had not seen it down before, in 7 weeks of daily proximity, and the difference it made to the landscape of her face was something he was going to need more than a single car ride to process. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "All right, you'll go, or all right, you'll think about it." "All right, I'll go," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the window, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that was different from every other version of her posture he had catalogued over 7 weeks. Something released, something that had been held in readiness for a long time, and was now, quietly, standing down. He looked out his own window at Seoul moving past. The city was the same city it had always been. The same layered density, the same Han River appearing between buildings at the intersections that faced south, the same Bukhansan Ridge holding its position above the northern districts with the patient permanence of a thing that has watched the city build itself up over generations and will watch it continue long after every person in this car is gone. He had loved this city since he was 11 years old, and it had been trying to teach him that it had no interest in his survival, and the love had survived the lesson, which was perhaps the most accurate thing about him that he knew. He thought about the breakfast alone, the morning of the explosion, the rice and the fish and the silence, the certainty. He thought about the East Wall maintenance access point and the wrong turn and the concrete floor of the Dobonggu facility and the sound of a weapon discharging and the chair moving before he could speak. He thought about a note left on his desk in handwriting that was practical and unsentimental, about a medication cabinet key in a jacket pocket, about the specific sound of someone laughing in a kitchen at something a sister said. 31 years. The Empire. The bomb. The wheelchair and the 6 months of silence, and the woman who had arrived 22 minutes late and looked at him without the layer of performance that everyone else brought to the act of looking at him, and had said, "I'm going to treat you like a person." The car moved north toward Seongbukgu. The afternoon light was going gold on the buildings along the ridge. Somewhere in the city, a man named Cha was conducting the quiet permanent business of an organization in transition, and a girl in Busan was living a life that did not yet know it had been changed, and the rooms of a mansion were waiting with the particular patience of places that have absorbed a great deal of living and are prepared to absorb more. Min-jae did not reach for Amara's hand. He thought about it. He sat with the thought of it. The distance between his hand and hers on the seat between them, the specific and consequential nature of that gap, all the things it contained and all the things crossing it would mean. He sat with it the way he sat with significant decisions, fully, without rushing the conclusion, letting the weight of it be what it was. Then he reached across and put his hand over hers. She turned her palm up. Neither of them said anything. The city continued past the windows, indifferent and enormous and entirely itself, and the car moved through it toward home, and Kang Min-jae held the hand of the woman who had stayed when he had given her every reason to leave. And outside the window, Seoul went gold, and then amber, and then the particular blue of a city evening settling in, and the story of what they were to each other. Not a boss and an employee, not a patient and a caregiver, not a man diminished and a woman who pitied him, but two people who had stood in the same fire and had come out the other side still standing, still themselves, still choosing. That story was not finished. It was, in the truest sense, only now beginning. The scars remained, the wheelchair remained, the city remained, holding all of it with the vast indifferent generosity of a place that has seen everything and judges nothing and continues regardless. But the man in the wheelchair had changed, not into something easier or cleaner or free of what he had done and what had been done to him, into something more honest than any of that. A man who had built an empire on the belief that strength was a wall you erected between yourself and the world, and had learned, through a car bomb and 6 months of silence and a woman who refused to use the service entrance of his grief, that the only strength worth having was the kind that let something in. He kept his hand where it was. The car drove on.